There's Thomas Phillips and Sir Thomas Staples, who also was given land around Moneymore, were the only two significant people to gain ground or land in County Londonderry who were not representatives of the London companies. Both Sir Thomas Phillips and Sir Thomas Staples were what were called servitors, who were military servants of the Crown, but we'll make some references to that presently. Unlike the other Ulster counties, there were no grants to natives. Londonderry was supposedly going to be completely settled by representatives of the London companies. When it came to implementing the plantation, the Londoners concentrated first in Coleraine, having decided to build a wall round Londonderry and leave the construction of the town to later. There are all sorts of ways in which we could measure the progress or the lack of it of the plantation, and one of the best ways is the survey by Captain Nicholas Pinner in 1618. Surveying Londonderry, Pinner concluded that the walls were excellent, a very strong wall, excellently made and neatly wrought of rubble limestone. Pinner also noted that a school had been recently finished. However, he also observed that only 92 houses holding 102 families had been built, well short of the 200 envisaged. There were also insufficient men in this new city to man its defences. Coleraine wasn't really an awful lot better. The planters started off in Coleraine with a great deal of enthusiasm, but this enthusiasm did not last. The wall at Coleraine, unlike that of Londonderry, consisted of sods filled in with earth and was already showing signs of decay. Similarly, at Coleraine, there were insufficient men to defend the town. And then Pinner went on to make a variety of other observations. He noted that the goldsmiths, the grocers, the fishmongers, the haberdashers, the merchant tailors, the vintners, the salters, and the skinners had all leased land to the Irish in defiance of the terms of their grants, and apparently without incurring displeasure. So from an early stage, one of the important aspects of the plantation was being ignored. Now, Pinner was not averse to noting what was good. He noticed that the ironmongers in Acadoué and the mercers in Movanonker and the drapers in Moneymore had resident agents, so that they were actually doing their best. He also noted that the grocers at Muff and the vintners at Ballachy had no castle. He noticed that the haberdashers at Artykelly and the merchant tailors at McCoscoff had not provided a bawn. A bawn is a fortified farmhouse, but we'll come back to that. In terms of singling out people for praise, he noticed that the goldsmiths had 30 families settled in their area around new buildings, making with under tenants some 90 armed men. And this was good. At the time when Pinner was making his survey, the grocers were at the other end of the scale. However, they at least did have an excuse. The leasee had recently died, and it was a state of affairs soon to be remedied, and the grocer's estate became one of the best cultivated estates in Ulster. The worst company, the worst show of all, was that of the cloth workers at Artyclave. According to Pinner's survey, the only British tenant was the parson of the parish, and all the land was inhabited with Irish. In many respects, at least in the early stages of the Plantation of Ulster, the results were not really desperately creditable to the London companies. Of the 6 escheated counties, County Londonderry, excluding the city and Coleraine, and perhaps that's an important exception, had by far the lowest total of British families. County Londonderry had 119 British families at the time of the survey. County Tyrone, on the other hand, had 447, County Donegal 417, Cavan 386, Fermanagh 321 and Armagh 290. So in some respects, at least in the early stages, you could say that the plantation of County Londonderry was not exactly a stunning success. You also get glimpses of whinging and gurning from the people who were planted here. There was a constant agitation for schools, for churches and bridges, and many of the planters had extensive complaints about customs duties and minor administrative abuses. In December 1618, the people of Draperstown were complaining about the conduct of Robert Russell, who was the local company agent. He was accused of turning Draperstown into Saturnalia, sort of a Sodom and Gomorrah. He had built a brewery. He was converting the town's meagre water supply into beer. He was buying up houses and turning them into drinking dens, and was paying his workmen partly in beer. The Sabbath was profaned, drunkenness was rampant, and there was brawling in the streets. Russell was moved somewhere else. A couple of years later, the people of Draperstown were better pleased with their new agent. Though some still had complaints, the water supply was not adequate. There was no market. And the streets were such a mess that people had to wear high boots to walk from one house to another. And there was also trouble from the wood cairn. The wood cairn were the native Irish who lurked around in the woods and sort of made occasional raids on the planters and killed people, stole their animals and things like this. I want to make some observations about the plantation elsewhere and fit some of this into a broader pattern. Outside County Londonderry, land was divided into proportions of 2,000, 1,500 and 1,000 acres, with three categories of grantee. English and Scottish chief undertakers had the heaviest responsibilities as regards fortification and settlement. Those who were granted 1,000 acres were required to build a walled enclosure called a bawn. Those who received 1,500 acres were required to build a stone house within the bawn, and those with 2,000 acres a castle. The bawn was intended to offer protection to the undertaker, his tenants and their animals in the event of attack, a full-scale attack by the native Irish. Undertakers were to ensure that the homes of their British tenants were built close to the bawn. So that's the undertakers. The next category, and we've already mentioned them in respect of Sir Thomas Phillips, were the civil and military servants of the Crown in Ireland, the servitors. They were allowed to have Irish tenants, but they could have lower rents if they settled the required number of 24 adult English or Lowland Scots per 1,000 acres. Successful applicants for grants came from lists drawn up in London and Edinburgh. Local recipients, the so-called deserving Irish, were to pay higher rents and to abandon Gaelic methods of tillage, harvesting and threshing. 28 baronies or precincts were established, 8 for English undertakers, 8 for Scottish ones, and 12 for servitors and deserving Irish jointly. Land was also set aside for the financial support of the Church of Ireland, Trinity College Dublin and the Royal Schools, which were eventually established at Armagh, Cavan, Dungannon, Pettora and Fove. The English response to the plantation fell significantly short of what the government expected, and Londonderry fits into this pattern. The Reverend Andrew Stewart, the minister of Donaghadee from 1645 to 1671, opined that the English would not migrate except to good land such as they had known at home, or to good cities where they might trade, both of which in those days